Hi, and welcome to our lesson on the Mexican-American War. Let's start with our two leaders here on the screen. This is a war between the United States and Mexico. We have on the right-hand side of the screen, James K. Polk. He'll be our President of the United States, and we'll look at him a little closer at the beginning of the lesson. And then to the left-hand side, we have Santa Anna. That should ring a bell from Texas history. He is, prior to this war, in exile, and Polk brings him back to help him put down basically the resistance to American forces. And Santa Anna betrays Polk and ends up leading the forces in this war, and he'll face yet another defeat. Let's move into the lesson. Let's start with this map of 1840. We have a new political party here, the Whigs. This party was mostly based around being anti-Jackson when Jackson was in office, and then later kind of lean more towards being anti-democratic party. They have a victory due mostly to an economic recession that happens, and the president that's elected for the Whigs, his name is William Henry Harrison. He dies within 2 months of being in office, and so this is a short-lived political party. We'll see the next election, 1844. Look at the difference in those states. Let's go back. I'm going to roll back to 1840 and see how many of those yellow states, ones that voted for the Whig Party, are now voting Democrat again. We have a victory by Polk. The Democrats are back, the Democratic Party. They really win mostly because Polk promises to expand westward. So he says one of his main objectives is to annex the Republic of Texas, to add it into the United States, and then also to stretch U.S. territory from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. He's kind of known as our manifest destiny president, and we'll see if he's able to keep his campaign promises. So this is our next map, and I wanted to show you this one to see, so you can see what the current United States looks like at this time. This is from census data, a map of basically the United States around 1840 to 1842. We can see here the capital, the District of Columbia, sitting right between Maryland and Virginia, and that becomes much more important as we get closer to the Civil War. We can also see that Florida is not a state yet, and we have all of this territory that's come out of the Louisiana Purchase that is either unorganized or it hasn't gained statehood yet. Up in the far left corner, we see the Oregon country. And let's take a look at this gray section here that's just kind of grayed out. You need to have information for that too. And so we're going to go roll to the next map. And we can see here what all of that gray actually is. So we have our states at this time, the territories, Oregon country once again. And notice here it says joint occupation of U.S. and British, which means that both of us are settling there. That's going to become a conflict that Polk wants to settle as well. And then we can see the Republic of Texas, not a state, but its own country. And this is not really the shape of Texas that we typically think of. Almost half of the state is in dispute, which basically means the Republic of Texas believes that parts of this pink section are theirs, and it's disputed with Mexico. Mexico believes that it belongs to them, and it's a part of a territory that's controlled by Mexico, but it's being claimed by Texas. And so this is where our dispute after the Texas Revolution, before this Mexican-American War really picks up. We can see two rivers here that are going to become the point of contention, what causes conflict. The Nueces River is going to run right here, and this is where Mexico believes the border between the Republic of Texas and Mexico is. And then at the very, very bottom, we can see the Rio Grande River, which runs along Texas's southern border. And that's where the Texans believe that their southern border ends. And we'll see how this conflict plays out. Today, we're going to identify and explain the causes and outcomes of the Mexican-American War, and you're really going to be able to explain the significance of this war on the impact of geographic growth, how we fulfill manifest destiny during this period. Let's start with Polk, though. He is our president of Manifest Destiny. He wins the election of 1844. He was kind of known as a dark horse candidate, meaning that people didn't expect him to win the nomination, but then he ends up going on to the presidential election and winning that as well. His three promises mainly are to annex Texas, negotiate the California and Utah territories from Mexico. He wants to purchase those, and then to acquire the Oregon territory and settle kind of this shared territory with Britain here. Let's look at Polk for a moment.
On a rainy day in March 1845, United States President James Knox Polk stood on the steps of the Capitol in Washington. There, he delivered an inaugural address intended to be heard not only in his own country, but in the capitals of Mexico and Great Britain.
Since the Union was formed, the number of states has increased from 13 to 28. Foreign powers do not seem to appreciate the true character of our government. To enlarge its limits is to extend the dominions of peace over additional territories and increasing millions.
James K. Polk had entered the presidency with a solid reputation as a congressman and Speaker of the House. His wife Sarah had managed his early political campaigns and was well known in Washington circles for her intelligence and charm. By comparison, Polk was considered humorless and rigid, even by those who admired the discipline he brought to his job.
He had a very strong sense of duty and professional obligation, and a very, very strong work ethic. As he was fond of saying, I am the hardest working man in the United States, and few could really argue with him.
Each evening, Polk would meticulously chronicle the day's accomplishments in his diary. Here he complained that his days were filled with office seekers, visiting groups of school children, tourists staring at him as he ate. Only at night could he reflect on what he had come to the White House to achieve. Polk's goals were influenced by his mentor, Andrew Jackson, whose philosophy of westward expansion had inspired a new generation.
They believe that the government should open up these regions so the resources there can be exploited, and anything that gets in the way of that exploitation should obviously be removed.
The expansionist vision would be condensed into one of the most powerful phrases in American history: manifest destiny.
It was a conviction that God had intended North America to be under the control of the Americans. It's a kind of early projection of Anglo-Saxon supremacy, and there is a racist element in it, but there is also an idealistic element.
To extend the boundaries of the United States was to extend the area of freedom. This was a common feeling. The model republic had certain obligations.
During his campaign, Polk had called for the annexation of Texas and the occupation of Oregon territory. But on both issues, he faced the risk of war. Mexico had never recognized the independence of Texas. Great Britain claimed Oregon. But the first diplomatic crisis of the Polk administration would involve Mexico.
All right, let's move on to that conflict. We're actually going to be using this portion of the backside of our folder. So on the backside of your westward expansion folder, you'll be in the top right corner. You either need to write or draw this information into that space, or it's already been there, it's provided to you. And so you'll just record your notes down here as we go. Feel free to pause the video and draw this in if you need to. So how did manifest destiny, this concept that we've been looking at, lead to the Mexican-American War? Let's look at History Channel for a moment to explain the roots of this conflict.
The American West conjures images of adventure, lawlessness, and opportunity. But what possessed us to go west in the first place? It all traces back to an important but not very well-known conflict in the mid-19th century called the Mexican-American War. In the 1840s, America was a pretty young country, and it was hungry to expand. President James K. Polk was especially eager to acquire more territory. He believed in manifest destiny. That's the idea the United States had a duty to expand westward across the North American continent. There was a lot of incentive for American settlers to go west. They could spread religion, strike it rich in business, or just get a fresh start. Needless to say, America's neighbor, Mexico, wasn't thrilled about the westward expansion craze. Both countries were already on thin ice. Mexico was bitter about losing Texas to the U.S. after it won its independence in 1836. President Polk wanted California and New Mexico, too, and he offered Mexico $30 million to purchase them. But they refused to sell. But hang on, conquering the West was America's manifest destiny, right? So Polk wouldn't take no for an answer. He picked a fight, sending troops to occupy a disputed area of the Texas and Mexico border. And when American troops and the Mexican cavalry clashed, Polk seized the opportunity to declare war on Mexico on May 13, 1846. Ultimately, Mexico was unprepared for war. Its internal politics were just a mess, and its cavalry couldn't measure up against the expertise of the U.S. military. After 2 years of fighting, Mexico was defeated, and in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it ceded a third of its territory to the U.S., areas that include modern-day Utah, California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. The Mexican-American War had a major impact because it resulted in one of the largest territorial expansions of the United States. It also launched the careers of a few generals you may have heard of, future U.S. President Zachary Taylor and Civil War titans Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant.
We'll get to those war generals when we get to the Civil War. Some of the causes here, some of the questions that we'll answer, we're going to use the reading resource that you have on the Mexican-American War. You can either read along on the screen or you can use that paper resource if you want to pause the video. Some information that you're looking for: what reasons was Texas not immediately annexed to the U.S.? Why was the election of President Polk important to Texas? And then why did Polk annex Texas? What other territory did he want from Mexico? We're going to use our reading resource. This is the white Mexican-American War pamphlet that you've been provided in class. You can read this using the pamphlet provided, like I said, and just pause the video or fast forward here, or you can read along, and I'm going to read it out loud for those that would rather listen. So we're looking for causes of the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War began in 1846 and ended in 1848. It was fought between Mexico and the United States. The war began because of a small battle along the border of Texas next to the Rio Grande River. When the Mexican-American War ended, Mexico had lost about 1/3 of its land, including nearly all of present-day California, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Causes of the Mexican-American War. Texas gained its independence from Mexico in 1836. At first, the United States did not want Texas to join the rest of the states in the U.S. Most Americans were against adding Texas because of the issue of slavery. They didn't want to add another slave state to the United States. The Mexican government was also angry with Texas and warned that any attempt at annexation or to add Texas into the U.S. would lead to war. Despite the arguments and threat of war, the annexation of Texas occurred after the 1844 United States presidential election of James K. Polk. President Polk wanted Texas to join the United States. Polk also wanted the land between Texas and California. He believed the United States had a manifest destiny to spread its borders from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. After James K. Polk was elected, Texas joined the United States as the 28th state on December 29, 1845. Once Texas became a state, President Polk asked Mexico if he could purchase land between Texas and the Pacific Ocean. When his offer to purchase those lands from Mexico was rejected, he started a fight between the United States and Mexico. Texas and Mexico had been arguing for over 10 years about the border of Texas. Mexico said the Nueces River was the border between the two countries. Texas claimed that the Rio Grande River was the border. The land between the two rivers was disputed. President Polk ordered American soldiers under the leadership of General Zachary Taylor to patrol the disputed zone between the Rio Grande River and Nueces River. So let's jot down our two main causes of the Mexican-American War. The first one here, the annexation of Texas. When Polk is elected and he adds Texas to the United States, this is going to cause hostility and conflict between the U.S. and Mexico. And secondly, here, our border dispute. Is the border the Nueces or is it the Rio Grande? And this is an issue that's going to be exploited by Polk. He's going to send troops into this region to basically pick a fight. So let's look and see what happened during the war.
When the United States accepted Texas as a state, Mexico believed it was an act of war. Mexican leaders still thought the Texas land belonged to them, and they refused to give it up. U.S. President James K. Polk offered to buy Mexico's northern land, but Mexican leaders refused to sell. President Polk sent General Zachary Taylor and the U.S. troops marching toward the Rio Grande to force Mexican soldiers back south towards their home country. On May 8, 1846, a major battle began at Palo Alto in southern Texas. The U.S. Congress declared war on Mexico on May 13, 1846. Texas was once again at war with Mexico, but this time, as a part of the United States, Texas was not alone in the fight. The Texas Rangers were one special group of men who played an important part in the war defending Texas from danger. Both the Mexicans and the Americans felt they were in the right. They were both determined to win the war. The United States won many of the battles and also tried several times to reach a peace agreement. An easy end to the war seemed hopeless. In the fall of 1847, General Winfield Scott led the U.S. Army and the Texas Rangers into Mexico. They captured Mexico City. The Mexicans were stunned that the United States had invaded their capital city. Everyone finally agreed to sit down and talk about how to end the war. On February 2nd, 1848, Mexican and American officials met in a small Mexican village called Guadalupe Hidalgo, where both sides decided on a treaty or written agreement to end the war. The United States received more than 500,000 square miles of land, including present-day California, Utah and Nevada, and parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. The United States agreed to pay Mexico $15 million. At last, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War.
All right. So we have this war, this conflict ending with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We're going to look at the three major parts here. Let's go back to our reading pamphlet. We're going to start with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ends the Mexican-American War. We're looking for the effects of this war now. Small attacks against U.S. forces in Mexico continued, but they were unsuccessful. The United States had won the war with the invasion and victory in Mexico City. Santa Anna resigned, and the United States celebrated its win. Finally, on February 2nd, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. This treaty established the Rio Grande and not the Nueces River as the U.S.-Mexican border. Under the treaty, Mexico also recognized the U.S. annexation of Texas and agreed to sell California and the rest of its territory north of the Rio Grande for $15 million. In 2 short years, the United States had achieved its manifest destiny, and its borders reached from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. All right, let's look at the parts. Basically, the 3 major outcomes of this war are listed as a part of this treaty that ends the war. So using the reading, go back and try to find these 3 parts. You can pause the video now. Coming back together now are 3 effects that you should have found. The first one, Mexico had to recognize the U.S. annexation of Texas. They had to agree that Texas was now a part of the United States, including that territory that was disputed between the Nueces and Rio Grande River. The second part you should have got, basically that the border is now settled at this Rio Grande River. That is going to be the United States southern border between Mexico and America. And lastly, the Mexican cession sold to the U.S. for $15 million. Mexico, basically, their hand is forced here. They're given the option of losing their country. The United States has troops sitting in Mexico City. They have essentially conquered Mexico and could take the nation. Instead, they're forced to settle to cede or to give up this land in a cession sold to the U.S. for $15 million instead, and then keeping that remaining territory that they had prior to the war. This is the territory that we're talking about here. The shape of Texas will change. We know the shape to stop here and go out towards the El Paso area. Initially, Texas stretched all the way up into Wyoming and throughout New Mexico. We'll see why that territory goes away. And then we can see this Mexican cession territory in pink. This is acquired by the United States in 1848, and we'll acquire this orange section here, the Gadsden Purchase, later from Mexico. We'll pay about $10 million for that. So a big difference here in size, 15 million for this pink section and later 10 million for that small little orange section. So we're going to wrap up this lesson by doing a quick check for understanding. In this part of the backside of your folder, you either have a Venn diagram already created there for you, or you need to draw it in. So on the back side of your folder, if you'll, bottom right-hand side, you'll draw 2 circles overlapping with the middle section. And both circles should be labeled, one with Texas and the other with California. We're going to compare and contrast these 2 states and kind of the origins of how they came into the United States. You have 5 options listed here. You're going to sort the following into the Venn diagram. The first one here, this was annexed by the U.S. in 1845. Here's second one, settlers attracted by gold at Sutter's Mill. Thirdly, this was formerly a part of Mexico. Fourth, it was ceded to the U.S. in 1848. And lastly, settlers were attracted by free land. So if you'll take these either reasons for people coming to that region or how they joined the Union, and even what they might both have in common, and then sort them into your Venn diagram. You should have 2 on either side and 1 in the middle. All right, to wrap up our lesson, here's a quick video over James K. Polk. I'm going to leave the instructions. I'm going to fast forward to the instructions for your activity, and you can listen to this while you work, or you can continue on with the coloring. We have 2 territories here that we need to add to our big map inside of our folder. The first one is going to be the Texas annexation. This should be labeled with the date that it was acquired. You need to outline and softly, very carefully, softly shade in this Texas territory in black. The Mexican Cession territory, the date for that is 1848. You're going to outline and color in this territory in red. Make sure that you put how the United States acquired both, and make sure that you've checked that your Venn diagram is correct. So here, disregard the timeline to the right here. Really, these are your map directions. You're going to add these 2 land acquisitions to the map of Manifest Destiny inside of your Westward Expansion folder. For each of these, you need the date, from who it was acquired, and how we acquired it. You're going to color this, and that's what you'll finish doing for the remainder of the class period. I'm going to go back to this video over Polk and leave this running while you continue on with your lesson. When this is over, the video will stop, and you need to finish your map before you leave class.
The greatest president. Which chief executive did the most? A Western woodsman playing good folk. To him the job was not a joke. Who is this amazing man? He was the Speaker of the House and the Governor of Tennessee. In 1844, the Democratic nominee. So, his resolve was clearly firm. He only wanted to serve one term. Tariff disputes he promptly fixed with the Walker Act in 46, and Texas finally in the mix. The Oregon Treaty and the war out west manifest destiny, and to keep prosperity safe and sound, an independent treasury. So, who's your favorite president? The greatest leader of our land. And for fans of history, his successor's name begins with C. So here's to life and liberty and all together now. One more time.